May 25th, 1977 saw the release of George Lucas's Star Wars, which quickly became a surprise blockbuster hit. Often regarded as one of the greatest and most influential movies ever made, it helped change the way movies were made and captured the imagination of a generation. Star Wars quickly became a pop culture phenomenon. Over the course of this series, I will be joined by a number of Star Wars fans from across YouTube and the toy collecting community, as we take a look back at their earliest memories of Star Wars and find out what made Star Wars great. Hello Toy Collector fans, Universal Toy Collector here, and welcome to the channel. And welcome to episode 6 of What Made Star Wars Great, the series where I invite guests on from across YouTube and the toy collecting communities to discuss their first experiences with Star Wars, and basically to find out what made Star Wars great. And joining us this week is Mr. Sags himself, Super Awesome. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. Hello, Stu. How you doing?
I'm not too bad. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure having you on the channel.
Oh, it's a pleasure being here. I mean, I've been watching your show and really enjoy it every week. It's a really good idea, and good show. And you've had great guests on, so it's.
Well, we've got another one on tonight, so awesome stuff. Really appreciate you joining us, like I said. Now, the reason I'm doing this series is because there has been a lot of negativity surrounding Star Wars. I want to try and get across some positivity, get that love back, the emotion of Star Wars and how it made people feel when they first saw it. But just before we get into that, John, I just want to ask you, do you agree with some of the negativity that's been floating around with Star Wars? I don't mean like people being racist or anything like that, or being bigots. I don't condone that at all. But just in general, the negativity surrounding Star Wars, is it just?
No, I don't believe it is. Because it's Star Wars is a weird animal, and I know like a lot of us have thought about what makes Star Wars different than every other franchise. Why does Star Wars get picked on more than other franchises? Because if you look at anything else, James Bond, Star Trek, look at Batman, for example. They've like Star Trek, James Bond, Batman, they've all had their ups and downs as they've gone through through the franchise's history. You know what I mean? Like Batman goes all the way back to the serial stuff in like the 40s and 50s. There were black and white serials. You know what I mean? James Bond has like 20 or 30 different movies. Some movies are good, some movies are bad, but the franchise keeps going. And it doesn't seem like people are picking on them when they have a bad movie. Star Trek has been going on since the 60s. Some of those movies, some of the TV shows are bad. Some of them are good, but you don't see people bashing the bad stuff as much as they bash on bad Star Wars. You know what I mean? So why, like, my question is always like, why does Star Wars get such scrutiny when all these other franchises, people just live with it and move on and wait for the next movie?
Do you think it's the fact that there could be a couple of things here? One, it could be the fact that the original trilogy was so fantastic and so perfect that it set the bar really, really high. And people's expectations...
Is it perfect, though? I mean, come
on,
Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is almost an exact copy of Star Wars.
But was the original trilogy, for you as a kid, not the most perfect movie ever made, or movies ever made?
Yeah, I mean, yes, as a kid. Oh, yeah.
That's the thing. We were kids when that film came out. Well, those films come out. So looking at it through kids' eyes, you're going to have a different perspective of it. So I guess because of the generation that grew up with Star Wars, they've got to an age now where nothing. Look, listen, for me personally, nothing can beat those films. Nothing can beat those films. They're still perfect in my eyes, and I'm still seeing it through children's eyes, or like a kid's eyes. Secondly, when the prequels came out, there was such a big gap between the movies. There was nothing else in between, really, was there? So, by the time the Phantom Menace came out, the way movies were made had changed. People's attitudes had changed. So, again, maybe that's another reason why people aren't sort of like picking up on it as much, or just getting a lot of negativity, because it's not. You see, when I watched the prequels, I didn't watch it through child's eyes. I watched it through grown-up eyes, and I was like, oh, okay, this is what Star Wars is to me. It took a bit of getting used to, but over the years, oh god, yeah. Did you know that?
The first time I saw the Phantom Menace, I was overjoyed that Star Wars was back in the theaters and
Yeah,
back.
but so was
And
I.
I sat there. I sat there for every single show that first day on into the night until the theater closed. And then I was back the next morning and watched it all day again. I literally spent 2 entire days in the theater. We camped out for a week in front of that theater to get tickets to go to Phantom Menace.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I was excited that there was going to be a new Star Wars. I was even more excited about the fact that we're going to be having more figures in the shops and more characters that we can collect and those kind of things. So, yeah, I was excited. Then I watched the movie and I thought, okay, right, you've got to give it a chance because it is the first part of the story. So it's when he's a kid and that. And then Jar Jar come on and I was like, really? You know, I know the guy gets a lot of hate and that's so unfortunate. It's not the actor's fault. I mean, Jar Jar was just one of those characters, but
yeah, I did want the Jar Jar scenes edited. I was like, you know, we can cut down a little bit on that character.
Yeah. But when Darth Maul came on the screen and that lightsaber battle, that was it. I was like, I've said it before. Wow, it was a wow moment. So those films for me did have wow moments. You know, not too sure about Attack of the Clones, I guess. But yeah, even with Revenge of the Sith, there was some wow moments in there. I mean, that lightsaber duel at the end, again, fantastic, you know. So
I just thought they kept getting better as the prequels went on, you know, and the first 2 I saw in New York, and then by the time the third one had come out, I was in Seattle, so I saw it out there. And but yeah, I mean, part of it could have been the whole hype because I was in a Star Wars club that started around 1994 in Rochester, New York, and it turns out the only other Star Wars club that was going on at the same time was the one in Seattle called Stars. And there's a club called Stars in Seattle, Sarlacc and Stars, and the acronyms mean something. The guys are very clever. And then in New York, there was one called the Greater Rochester Area Star Wars Fan Club, and they both started in 1994. And right before like the new toys came back and all that stuff. So
yeah,
you know, that's when these clubs both started. And so the club and I in Rochester, we got together, and I managed to take a week off of work, and a full 7 days before tickets went on sale, we were camped out in front of that theater.
Seriously,
and we had because growing up in high school, I made a lot of friends from many different schools. Like as soon as I was 16, I was driving to other neighborhoods and other schools. So I met people from all over, like, you know, I mean, I had when people were having parties, they would go, John, we need your book. I had a little black book that had over 300 phone numbers in it of friends and people I'd met around Rochester area. So they'd be like, we need to call all those people, and we'd call them all. Once a year, we'd have a party at a different place. Someone's parents were out of town at least once every summer. And we'd have a party with like 200 or 300 people that I would invite. And they were just crazy. But so through getting to know that many people, by the time Star Wars Phantom Menace came out, I knew people at the major radio station. So we had a radio sponsored tent with the banner from 97, you know, the Nerve written on the side of it. I think it was 91.7 or something. The Nerve written on the side of it. They gave us a banner. They gave us food. We had a pizza shop that stepped by every day to give us pizza. We had newspaper coverage because I had friends that worked in the newspapers. And then I had friends that ended up doing work on the morning show on like ABC. So they came down like about 2 or 3 times during the week and were interviewing us and filming us as we were in line. So we basically had sponsorship from newspaper, radio, and television because of all the connections I had in the area. So it was an incredible time for me, as well as getting to see a new Star Wars film. You know what I mean? Like we were in all the media and spotlight for that whole week. You know,
I mean, that must have been an experience in itself, really. I mean, that is part and parcel of it, isn't it? That's part and parcel, should I say, of the experience. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, did you feel like that then when they announced the sequels, the sequels, because I know I again for myself, I was excited that we were having a new Star Wars movie. It was a few years after Revenge of the Sith. Again, attitudes change, the way films are made, and the cinematography has changed a lot, in that space of time. Again, I was really excited, but then I saw the film and it kind of, I felt flat. Again, is that down to my expectations?
I don't know. Force Awakens was a brilliant film. I can remember the same thing. Like I was in Seattle when Force Awakens came out, and my friend Chris and we went to the theater and probably watched it 4 or 5 times that first opening day. And by the end, I had watched Force Awakens 23 times in the theater.
Ooh, wow.
I absolutely loved it. But I went 23 times partially because I was getting close to 20, and I remembered a story my mom told me when I was a kid and we saw Star Wars for the first time. I had begged her to go again. And back when Star Wars came out, it would stay in theaters for 7 or 8 months, those movies.
Yeah.
They weren't like a 2-week thing and then they're gone. So we kept going back and kept going back. And as long as there were bodies in the seats, the theater would keep playing that movie. And so we kept going. And then it went to a drive-in, and we went to the drive-in a couple times. And my mom said by the time that thing left theaters and we could no longer find it in any of the neighborhood theaters, we had seen it 23 times. And I always remember that my mom took me to see Star Wars when I was a kid 23 times. Wow. So when Phantom Menace came, or when Force Awakens came out, and Chris and I and a couple other people had gone and see it a number of times, I was looking, because I keep my ticket stubs, and I was looking at my ticket stubs, and I'm like, wow, I've gone to that movie 18 times. And I go, if I go like 5 or 6 more times, I'm going to hit 23, just like the original. That would be a neat thing to do.
It's mad.
So it was like...
Mad. I will say this, out of the 3 sequels, I think that was probably the better film out of the 3. And again, when that came out, The Force Awakens, there was big hype around it. So the local Toys R Us store, they had like a big, like sort of like, not ceremony, what do you call it? Like an opening thing where they had all
the Midnight Madness thing.
Yeah, that's it, something similar to that. Yeah. But that, again, that was part and parcel of a Star Wars movie when it came out. But then after The Force Awakens, it did feel flat because I don't think that really happened with The Last Jedi.
Well, they did a madness for The Last Jedi, but it was very small because no, it wasn't, because Solo was after Last Jedi, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was, yeah.
I don't know why it was smaller, but I know that by the time they got the Solo, they had completely canceled it because of Last Jedi. Everything got canceled because of Last Jedi, because it was received so poorly that they did a knee-jerk reaction, which I hate. I hate that these corporations don't trust their own material to come through. They instead they do a knee-jerk reaction and just cancel everything and try to start over, which is really not what they shouldn't listen to the vocal minority whenever things happen. But
I mean, there was a lot of hoo-ha with those sequels because, I mean, in all honesty, John, do you feel that there was a story from episodes 7, 8, and 9?
Absolutely not. They had no clue where they were going. I think Abrams had an idea in his head when he was doing Force Awakens of where the story should go, but Kathleen Kennedy and the other executives had it dead set in their mind that there was going to be no plan, and that what they were going to do is leave it with an ending and then have a different writer and director. They thought it was a clever idea at the time to have a different writer and director sort of pick up where Star Wars left off and then take it wherever they wanted to go and then leave it in a cliffhanger again, and then have a third person come in and try to work it out. Because they've done it before with television. I think Star Trek did it a couple times where they would have one person come on and write their characters into a problem, and then they'd have a to be continued, and a different writer would come in and get them out of that problem and solve the thing. And it worked for television with Star Trek because it just was something that was quick. They're hour-long shows. You move on to the next one in the series. If you didn't like that two-parter, you went to the next one. But for Star Wars, And for movies that are going to be in the theater and cost you like hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't play that gamble. You don't. And what happened was,
I'm so surprised they never had that. You had, because I think was it Colin Trevorrow was going to be doing the
third one,
the Rise of Skywalker, but for some reason he didn't end up doing it. And do you think that was maybe because of where The Last Jedi had been taken? He thought, well, what am I going to do with this now?
Yeah, because he finished the story. He effectively, when they did Last Jedi, if you really look at it as a 2-part film, Force Awakens and Last Jedi, he ends it at the end of Last Jedi. He kills Snoke. He has the major confrontation between Kylo Ren and Rey, and they walk away. You know what I mean? Like, he basically ends the trilogy at the end of that movie. So whoever was taking up the third one has to go, oh crap, I got to invent a new villain because I don't have a villain now. I've got to figure out a way to get Rey and Kylo back together for another confrontation because that one seemed like the end confrontation and they walked away going their separate. You know what I mean? So it's like somehow I got to figure out how to make a trilogy out of something that was really a 2-parter.
It's never going to work.
It's
never going to work. And look, listen, and that's why I think some of the criticism aimed at Disney and Lucasfilm is just because you look at the way the original trilogy was made. I mean, look, to be fair, we're surprised it got off the ground at all. If you've seen that, the making of the, was it Empire of Dreams?
Yeah.
But it was just so well done. I mean, you had a story from start to finish, episodes 4, 5, and 6. He didn't know it was going to be a big success. It was, so he managed to be able to do that. Then, when the technology came around and the way films were changed because of Jurassic Park and the CGI, he went back and then did the prequels. And yes, maybe there was a little bit too much CGI in there, but again,
he had a plan.
1, 2, 3. He had a plan and a story.
Yeah,
I would have expected better from Lucasfilm. Kathleen Kennedy was handed the reins by George Lucas in trust to do a good job and take Star Wars forward and build on what had already been made, but that just didn't materialize. But listen, this isn't.
And it's really strange. It's really strange to me too because Kathleen Kennedy has a really good track record. If you go all the way back, I mean, she worked on the Indiana Jones films. She worked on so much stuff that we grew up with that it's like, why did she drop the ball? Like, what the heck happened? And I almost wonder if she just kind of went like, I'm going to let these guys do it and just keep my hands out of it. And really, she should have had some hands in the pie instead, because I don't think that she knew what was quite going on with the second film until they had it almost at release date. And then she was probably looking at it going, holy crap. You know what I mean? Like, because they had to have known, they had to have looked at it and been like, you ended the trilogy. Like, what did you do? But it was too late to change it because they set that date and they weren't going to move that date. At the time, they were like dead set on Christmas of that year. And if they had looked at the film and went, "Wait, what the heck did you do?" They didn't. Instead of pushing the date and fixing the film, they just went, "Well, we got to go with what we got because we have to release it on that date. That's what we said we were doing, so we're doing it."
That's mad. That's mad. I mean, don't forget you had Rogue One in between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, which for me,
brilliant film.
Was a very good film. That was a great film. It really was. And then you had like Solo after. I mean, that film never stood a chance. It never stood a chance. And then by the time like the Rise of Skywalker come out, I think people had sort of like lost interest. I think they were done with it.
Yeah, well, they didn't. Yeah, they didn't care because of what happened with Last Jedi. A lot of people looked at it as, because I remember having the discussion with my brother and other people like, why would we see the Rise of Skywalker when it's already all done? You know what I mean? Like that story is finished with what they did in Last Jedi. So why would we go? What's this third one going to do? And there's bits to like. So if you look at Force Awakens, okay, J.J. Abrams followed the Star Wars rules. Okay, if you look at the first trilogy, Star Wars, Empire, Jedi, you look at Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
Okay. Every single one of them has some character saying, "I have a bad feeling about this." Every single one of them has 1138 hidden in the thing somewhere. There's the numbers 1138 written somewhere hidden. It's also in the dialogue somewhere. Every single one of those films ends up having a monster in it. There is a point where they come across the Dianoga, or they come across the Wampa, or they come across the Rancor, or they, there's a monster in it somewhere in every one of them, okay? And there's other little things, there's other subtle things that make it a Star Wars movie that every Star Wars fan is looking for in their head. And Abrams did it with Force Awakens. It hits all those marks. Last Jedi doesn't hit any of the marks. There's none of that in it. All of the traditional stuff that's in a Star Wars movie were not in it. There's not a single point where someone says, and people claim, they go, well, BB-8 in his beeping says, I have a bad feeling about this at the beginning of the film. And I'm going, BS. You're saying that now. You're saying that now because everyone's complaining that you didn't put the line in the movie. So you're just making crap up saying, well, it was at the beginning of the film when Poe was flying and BB-8 beeped it instead. So yeah, beeping it doesn't count. We can't tell. And I don't think it was really there. I think he just made that up afterwards because he was getting criticism,
Yeah. It's such a shame because, like I said, I've said this before. No one wants to see Star Wars fail, because if Star Wars fails, then we all lose out in one way or another. We lose out because Hasbro and they won't release the figures because people aren't buying the figures because they've given up on the franchise. We don't get to explore different parts of the galaxy. I mean, look, Rian Johnson, he took Star Wars off in a different direction. And people are saying, well, he did a great job because he took it off in a different direction. But where did he go?
Yeah.
That's the question. Where did he go?
He's a good filmmaker, but I don't think he should have had the middle act in a 3-part show without a plan for that 3-parter, because he essentially did end it, and then you've got a problem with the third one. If he had made a standalone Star Wars movie, we probably all would have loved it. You know, because his other films are. I love Looper. I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, I've heard
his other.
That's a great film.
Some of his other movies are very well done, and I think crafted wise, the way he crafted the film isn't that bad. I mean, if you look at it just for that fight at the end with when they're in that bunker on that planet with the salt all over it, like that's a good battle scene. That's a really cool battle scene. It's a cool fight between Luke and Kylo Ren that he orchestrated there, but the problem, so I think that if he had done just a standalone film that had a beginning and an end within the one film, he probably would have made something we all liked, but they just shouldn't have given him the middle act of 3 parts. Without a plan,
Who would you say was at fault then? Would you say it was Disney? Would you say it was Lucasfilm? The fact that they didn't get a story for episodes 7, 8, and 9, that run smoothly.
It's got to be the executives. It's got to be the executives at either Lucasfilm or Disney, because they thought that they could just hand it off to people and not have to follow a plan. They just, and I've heard them, in recent years admit, well, they just didn't have a plan. They should have had a plan and they didn't. They just thought that they could wing it and it would all fall into place. But yeah, they clearly that's what those wrong.
I mean, that's shocking. I mean, do you think there's too many executives involved now? Because going back to the original.
I think television and movies in general right now have a big problem, and we saw a little bit of that problem recently with the Acolyte. I'm like you. I don't want to get political. I don't believe that. I believe in representation. I think everybody should be represented. Yeah. But there's got to be a way to do it that makes sense, because what happened with the Acolyte is they pushed an agenda.
Yep.
And by pushing that agenda, they made something. They put people in the acting positions that were not qualified to act. And I can overlook some of that stuff and just kind of try to get involved in the universe. But a lot of people were pointing out the acting was terrible. A lot of people were pointing out that some of the story writing was terrible. The dialogue was really bad. And it's not. It's because in order to fit in certain inclusive elements that they wanted to fit in there because they were pushing an agenda, they didn't go for talent. They went for Xing some boxes on a chart. You get what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And therefore it failed. And now they've canceled any chance of a second series coming along because they're just like, well, people must not be into this part of Star Wars. And it's not that we Star Wars fans don't want to see a story. We want to see a story about the Sith. We want to know what happened with the Sith. We want to see what happened with Plagueis and his apprentice and how this all worked out. But we don't need an agenda pushed upon us forcefully. Like we were forcibly getting an agenda pushed upon us without having talent for talent's sake. Like if you're good at your job and you just happen to be in one of those representation pools that aren't usually represented, but you got the job on talent, good. You're fine. Just go with it. But if you're put in that position only for the reason that you fit into one of those groups, it makes for crappy stories because you don't have the talent.
I mean, it didn't help when Leslie Headland admitted that
because of a certain demographic you fit in, you know?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, Leslie Headland's wife. I mean, she was playing one of the parts. I mean, she was probably one of the most boring characters going in the series. You know, Vanestra. And then you know when you hear Leslie Headland turn around and say, "Oh well, you know, I purposely got in writers that didn't know anything about Star Wars." Why would you do that? Why would you do that?
Because they were checking a box. They were like, "Well, that's because this one was lesbian." Check. This one was so whatever. Check. Checking boxes on a list of minorities instead of for talent. And that's just what happens. You end up with a show that gets canceled and makes no money. And instead of looking at themselves and going, you know, we made a crappy thing because we just checked some boxes, they go, well, clearly the fans don't like this time period.
Yeah, and look,
we're not
listen,
going to go there again. And it's like, that's not the message you should get, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one thing that has really got my back up. So you've got, I mean, I hold Leslie Headland, Amanda Stenberg, and Kathleen Kennedy. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, for crying out loud. I hold them responsible for what's happened since then. You know, they've come out and said, you know, these, you know, fans of, you know, toxic male fans, they're racist, they're bigots, they're all this sort of stuff. I don't like that. That is bang out of order. And basically what they've done now is they've started a bloody race war and, you know, arguments between two sets of fans within the fandom of Star Wars. They've buggered off and they've gone quiet now. You don't hear anything. Do you know what I mean?
They stirred the pot. They stirred the pot.
Accountable. It does my head in. And accountable was the word I'm looking for. And I think they should come out and apologize, because what other IP do you know that people have come out and attacked the fans?
Yeah,
you know, I've never known anything like it. It's
kind of currently going on. Like, I don't know if you know the whole thing. I mean, I don't want to spend the whole show talking about this because it bothers the hell out of me. But I will point up one more last point. I don't know if you know the whole thing between Henry Cavill and Warhammer 40K, Amazon Prime, and what's going on.
No.
So Amazon Prime owns the option to make films and television shows about Warhammer 40K. Warhammer 40K is a tabletop miniature game like Dungeons and Dragons and other things, but a lot more complicated. That's been going on for like 40 or 50 years. I mean, this thing is it's been around a long time. I mean, people were playing it when I was like 5 years old, and they're still playing it today. You know, and Henry Cavill was one of those people, the guy who played Superman in the more recent DC things. Henry Cavill, he was playing that game, the tabletop game, since he was 10 years old, and he still plays it. Like when he was on set for Justice League and stuff, there's a story about him bringing some miniatures and trying to get the other actors to play board games with him with these miniatures, you know?
Yeah.
So Amazon Prime said, we got the perfect person to run this. Henry Cavill, we want you to be our Kevin Feige. We want you to be our James Gunn and oversee a huge shared universe inside the Warhammer 40K universe, because you know the story, you know the stuff, you've grown up with it, you've got 30 years experience with this thing, 30 plus years. Like, so you're the perfect guy to run this. and they said, we want it to be as authentic as possible, stay true to the lore, stay right in there. We're going to make television shows. They're going to start with a show, and they want to make a couple different shows that all connect and ramp up to a movie. And Amazon Prime wanted to be one of the first streaming services to actually put a film in theaters. You know what I mean? Like they were, and this was going to be their wave to bring it all in and make this powerful impact. And then they looked at what he was writing, and he's got a story about the Ultramarines for his first show, okay? The Ultramarines, by lore, by the history of the game that's been going on for years, they're all men, either white or black men, okay? The Ultramarines are men, and some of them have lived for hundreds of years, 200, 300, 400 years, because they get mechanical augmentations, and if their body gets like hurt, they'll get their arm cut off and a new one spliced on, or you'll see one guy with stitches around his neck in the lore, like it looks like his head was transplanted back onto another body or something. You know what I mean? Like, and they do whatever they can to keep these guys alive. They get riddled with bullets, and they'll take them back. They'll drag their body back. As long as there's a little bit of life in them, they will bring them back with mechanical and bio whatever ways, and they're in these big suits, and the only ones who have in the lore that can sustain that kind of thing are these big beefy men that are huge. You know what I mean? And these guys are like 7 feet tall. They're massive, you know, and when they get the armor on, they could be 8 or 9 feet tall. They're just massive space marines, you know. And it's not to say there aren't women or people of color or other things in the lore. They're just in different factions, different parts of the army. So like the women have their own corps. So they have their own corps, and they're called a totally different thing. And Amazon came back to Henry Cavill and said, you can't do this. We need a female ultramarine, and we need a one that's Hispanic, and we need one from the Asian countries. We need one of them to be gay, and we need one. They were checking all these boxes again, and Henry Cavill goes, well, that's not part of the lore. You hired me to be as true to the story as possible, and now you're asking me to change all the lore. The fans are going to go crazy. When any fan of 40K watches this, they're going to see that every single thing is wrong, and we didn't follow the lore at all. They're not going to end up watching it. They're going to bash it on every social media, and then you're going to cancel it after the first season and say, well, I guess our fans don't want to see 40K. When you know what I mean?
Mad world we live in.
So they're fighting because he's like, you hired me to be true to the lore, and now you want to change everything about the lore. Like, how is that you know what I mean? Like,
but with Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy's been there from practically the start.
Yeah.
Why all of a sudden has she gone bloody ultra feminist?
I don't know. Yeah,
I don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand. Anyhow, look, that's enough about that. Those were our thoughts. So that was brilliant. What were your earliest memories of Star Wars?
So this is where I was hoping we would go. So
we got
all that BS out of the way. Yeah, and So my Star Wars life, my Star Wars experience here, it starts with the first movie. My godfather was traveling up the East Coast, and he stopped in Georgia, and he saw Star Wars.
Yeah.
And he immediately went to a phone outside, and he called my dad up, and he said, you won't believe what I just saw in a movie theater down here in Georgia. He goes, I just saw this thing called Star Wars. You have to take John to the theaters to go see Star Wars. And my parents were like, John doesn't sit through a movie. We tried to take him in to see some of the Disney movies, like the animated things, like, you know, and he goes, he would get up, and if we're not watching him, he'll get up and run around the theater. One time they caught me outside talking to the popcorn person, you know, so I had left the theater. While they were watching the film, they looked down and, where the hell did he go? You know what I mean? And they find me out in the lobby talking to the popcorn person and eating pieces of popcorn that the guy gave me a little bag of, you know? So they were like, there's no way. Why? We don't like taking him to movies because he just visits and doesn't watch, doesn't pay attention. So Mom eventually caved in. I think maybe through commercials or word of mouth or something. She eventually caved in, took me to the theater, and she put me on the inside so I couldn't go anywhere, and made sure there was a person sitting there. So I was trapped between this stranger and my mom. And she said that before the movie started, I was jumping around in my seat. I was getting up. I was turning around. I was trying to talk to the person next to us, and she was picking me up and putting me back in the seat and being like, sit up, sit down. And then the first thing hit, and she said, you looked up at the screen and that crawl happened. And she goes, I was reading it to you. I was saying, this is what's going on, And then she goes, that ship went over and you suddenly went quiet. She goes, your whole eyes went up to that ship and you just got totally quiet. And she goes, I looked back a little bit later and you're literally on the edge of the seat. You're just basically, she said, I was sitting right on the edge of that seat with my mouth open, and it was that way the whole movie. She goes, the movie ended. She goes, the movie ended, the credits come up. She goes, you just looked up at me and said, we got to go again.
Really?
And she took me again. She took me again.
Wow.
And she just knew I was hooked at that moment,
So,
and
being a young John, when that ship come across the top, that Star Destroyer come across, I mean, what were your feelings when you first saw that?
Well, the thing is, I don't remember a lot of my own feelings of how, I can't go back to that moment because I was only about 5 years old, 73. So that would have been 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, I was probably 4.5 years old. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So it's hard for me to actually remember and put myself in that space. But it just had to have blown me away the way that they were describing how I was just sitting there, and I had to go again. And what I remember is probably a year or two later when it was at the drive-in theater, because I remember we had a green station wagon, and the back tire, there was a floor in the back made of plastic or something, whatever that plastic is they used in the early 80s, and this was our brand new family car, the station wagon, this bright green station wagon that we got. And she opened up the floor and took the spare tire out and all the junk that was under there. And because when you went to the drive-in theater, they would look in the window and they'd go, all right, 2 adults and you got 6 kids. Okay, that'll be $20, And my mom was like a cheapskate. So every time she took us, she would take everything out of that little space and we'd hide underneath. So there'd be mom and maybe her friend, and there was 2 kids at the back. They'd get in for $8 instead of 20. And then when we pulled up to the thing, she'd open the hatch, and us kids would all pile out. So basically, I gathered our friends, and I was like, "We're doing the Millennium Falcon." I go, "Everybody pile in. You're Ben Kenobi. I'm Chewbacca. That's Luke. We're all hiding under the floor. Mom's gonna smuggle us in, And I'm sure we were giggling and everything underneath that floor, and pretended to be like the guys in the Falcon where they were underneath, in that smuggler's hatch,
That is awesome. And then,
so I remember those things. I remember going to the drive-in and just having fun, pretending that the green station wagon was the Falcon and that was the smuggler's hatch, and we were always smuggling kids in.
That's such a drive-in, That is awesome. That is awesome. And then what about the figures? Because then, a year or so later, the figures came out. There was a bit slow figures, weren't they? Because no one was going to be a success. But I'm sure you got into the figures, no doubt.
Yeah, and I don't particularly remember waiting for the early bird, but my Chewbacca does have the green gun, and my R2-D2. When people have looked at it and they see, I guess there's some way a stamp on the bottom or the way the date stamp is written, they can tell that my R2-D2 that I had since I was a kid is from the early bird set. But the Luke and Leia, apparently there's no way to tell.
Okay.
And the Luke and Leia that I had as a kid are so beat up, they're floppy loose. And the Chewbacca is actually floppy loose too. You can hang onto their head and their arms and legs just flail all over, so... And the Chewie I still have, but the Luke and Leia have been, they probably broke or got destroyed at some point and they were gone. But I still have that Chewbacca and I still have that R2-D2. So we probably did get the early bird set, but I don't particularly remember waiting and getting it in the mail. So it could have been something that Mom did, because oftentimes Mom would do those mail-ins. She would collect everything. We had a junk drawer that she would put all the points in. And then Mom would get it. And then one day she'd just show up and be like, look, I got you a figure, So I have a feeling that she probably got the early bird set, opened it up, pulled the figures out with their weapons, and then one day just came to us and said, here's your figures. and we had no idea that they came in the mail. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like
wow.
she just showed up with them one day. And then
Oh.
that year, so that would be like middle of the year 78. And then that year for Christmas, our family got together and they each bought the remaining whatever would it be, like 8 figures or whatever to make the first 12. And my grandmother, I have a photo of my grandmother giving me Han Solo that year, and she put it in a little white box. So they didn't give me the carded figure. She opened it, took the blaster. My grandmother took the blaster away because she did not believe that kids should be playing with guns.
Really? Wowzers.
And then she put the Han Solo in a little white box and gave it to me. And I have that photo of me holding onto the white box, like, oh, look at my mouth is just like it's this awesome thing, you know. And someone else in the family had gotten me the Sand Person. Someone else got the Jawa. Someone else got the Star Destroyer, or I think he was Death Squad commander at that point.
That's it. Yeah.
And someone else had gotten me Darth Vader. You know, so by the end of that Christmas, with the 4 that my mom had gotten, I had all 12 figures, and we had the Land Speeder. I got the TIE Fighter, and my brother got the X-Wing, and I can remember that year. Like, my brother would bring out the X-Wing and he'd be flying it with his Luke Skywalker in it. And I would chase him. We would run around the house, just constantly running around the house. I was chasing him with the TIE Fighter and I'd shoot it down. And Mark would throw the X-Wing and
what?
You know, because I shot him down. It crashes, you know.
Wow.
And a lot of times it would crash into the bushes, so we'd try to keep it safe and hit the bushes that were out front of the house. And then it would be my turn to run, and he'd chase me, and I'd get shot and hit the button, and a wing would fly off the TIE Fighter, and then I'd be like, woo, 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 and I hit the other button, the other wing would fly off, and then I just have that ball of a cockpit, and I throw that into the bushes. He died, you know. It was just that kind of stuff. And I mean, it was, I mean, for those years, I mean, probably all the way through into the early 80s, from like 78 up into probably like 82 or 83, and maybe into even 84, like Star Wars was our life. That was all we played with. I mean, we by 84, we had every single figure all the way up to Anakin Skywalker that we had gotten. And we had every single Star Wars figure up to Anakin Skywalker. And then some of those last 17 after Anakin, because we got Anakin as a mail away. And then by then we were full on into G.I. Joe, and we heard there were no more Star Wars movies. So I think we just kind of went, all into G.I. Joe and left Star Wars sort of in the wind. Did
that bother you as a kid back then when there was no more Star Wars after Return of the Jedi? I mean, everybody was assuming that was it. I mean, you had like the best part of like 9 years of Star Wars from 77 all the way through to 83.
Because what happened with me was somewhere it was probably
That's
about
6 years, by the way. My maths is shocking. That's 6 years, not 9 years. Good
God.
Yeah,
okay. It was probably about probably somewhere near the end of 1979, because the first Bantha tracks that I own from the Star Wars fan club is talking about next month Empire Strikes Back hits theaters. So we must have got in probably like, did that come out in May also? So we probably got into the club say February or March, April of 1980. So we were able to get an issue of the Bantha tracks that said like next month Empire Strikes Back hits the theaters, So, and in Bantha tracks in the fan club, you would read the making of Star Wars. You would read how they made Star Wars, and then after Empire came out, there were all these, but from between Empire and Jedi, there were all these issues that went back and told you how they made Star Wars, how they made Empire. They had actor interviews, so you got to hear like the actors like on set and what they went through. And I read all that material. I would get, like, if they were featured in Time magazine, Mom bought me that magazine, and I would read that article 10, 15 times, So I knew the making of Star Wars and making of Empire Strikes Back like the back of my hand, you know what I mean? So I kind of knew how they like that. There were like he wrote this whole backstory for Star Wars and took the middle part of his story and made Star Wars and chucked the first part in the sort of like chucked it in the bin at the beginning, but left it off to the side. So I knew about, and the other thing is Mom had got me the book, The Adventures of Luke Skywalker, told through the Journal of the Wills. You know what I mean? Like there was a book that came out in 1976, and the first chapter of that book is actually what do they call it? A prelogue or prologue? Like
prologue, prelogue,
yeah, like the beginning part. And in that beginning part, that first chapter, they talk about how Senator Palpatine, they actually used the word Palpatine back in 1976 when this book came out. And it says Senator Palpatine was through his political scheming was promoted to Chancellor of the Republic. And he manipulated everybody in a way to form a battle between two different factions within the Republic. And he eventually made himself Emperor of the Galaxy. And he basically manipulated a Jedi named Anakin Skywalker into like doing his bidding without knowing he was doing his bidding. And then and Anakin was trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then they had a battle. They described this battle at the end where there was a Sith, a Dark Lord, and the unnamed Dark Lord and Anakin and Obi-Wan were fighting over a pool of lava. And in the cave in the background was the Emperor watching this fight. And he silently said to himself, whoever wins this battle is going to be his new apprentice. You know what I mean? And they would move forward as two. And during the battle, both Anakin and the Jedi, the Dark Lord, fell into the lava and dropped his saber. Obi-Wan picks up the saber, and Obi-Wan and Anakin had the same discussion. They were saying like, we've got to kill the Sith, and Anakin said, that's not the Jedi way. We can't kill him. He's got to be brought to justice. And he's like, no, we have to kill him. It was the same dialogue that in the movies Anakin has with Mace Windu.
Yeah.
So, but he changed it for the movies when he flushed it out. But it's basically the same idea, but they were talking about this unnamed Sith. And so, in a sense, Anakin turns against Obi-Wan, and it's now Obi-Wan fighting both of these people because they have a different opinion on if the dark thing should live. And then during the battle, they both fall in the lava, and then Obi-Wan picks up Anakin's saber and leaves, and assuming they're both dead. And then this hand comes out, and the Emperor pulls the hand and pulls the guy out and says, if you give in to the dark side, I will make you a Dark Lord, and you will be forever known as Darth Vader. And he says, I give myself to the teachings and the dark side and all that. Yeah. So you weren't sure, even in the book, the way he wrote it, if it was Anakin or if it was the other dark guy. And that person became Darth Vader. And then they start with Luke on the farm and all that, and they go into the chapters as normal. And it's a brief chapter that might only be like 6 or 7 pages long, but he sets the background and the ground rules for the prequels essentially in 1976 in this book called The Adventures of Luke in the Journal of the Wills.
That's insane.
And then after the movie came out, they republished the novel as Star Wars, you know, and they cut that chapter's not in that book. You know, they just start it with Luke and do what's in what you see in the movie. You know what I mean? So if you could find that little blue, it's a blue book. If you could find that, you get a lot more background to the story.
Yeah, blimey. Yeah, that sounds absolutely incredible. I didn't know that.
So I read the death out of those things. I got the books even back then, Splinter of the Mind's Eye and the Adventures of Han Solo and the Adventures of Lando Calrissian. Like I got all those novels and read them to death. And it was like, and I was picking up all the story books and all those things that they had. And so that's where I first encountered the Jabba the Hutt scene, was in one of the storybooks.
Oh, wow.
I was like, wait a minute, this wasn't in the movie. What's this? And they had that scruffy looking guy instead of like Jabba the Hutt. It's like, I was like, wow, why wasn't this in the movie? And I saw pictures of the parts where Luke was looking through the binoculars and they had Cammy and Fixer and stuff. You know what I mean? So I knew about all that stuff even back when around the time of Empire Strikes Back because I was
Wow.
just absorbing all
Reading
this.
the books.
I was
That's
just so much
insane.
into Star Wars that I would absorb any material I could get, you
Well,
know?
so what was it about Star Wars then that really stood out for you?
I think it was just, I mean, today as an adult, I can say, you know, it really struck a mark with me with the hero's journey. The thing that Joseph Campbell always brings up is why he believes that Star Wars was a perfect story. And Lucas being a student of Joseph Campbell and all that, like paid attention and put that in there on purpose. But like as a kid, I enjoyed stuff like Clash of the Titans. I enjoyed that hero figure having to go through these trials and become triumphant in the end. And like I probably loved the original Clash of the Titans movie just as much as I loved Star Wars because it had that hero figure. It had the giant Kraken monster at the end. It had Pegasus, a flying horse, you know, and all this cool battles and stuff. You know what I mean? So I think it just hit my adventurous mind. I loved that level of adventure. And I think just subconsciously I could make that leap that not all adventures have to be in like medieval times or in ancient, you know what I mean? Like it's okay to put it in space as well. You know what I mean? And I think I just identified with all those kind of stories that, because I loved the story of King Arthur too. I loved the story of Hercules. I loved all those mythological stories when I was a kid. I would go to I'd go to the library and my mom would say, you'd go over to those sections and sit down with those mythology books, and you would just sit there in the library until I was like, she would go grocery shopping or do something, but she'd drop me off at the library, and I would sit in that mythological section reading about Hercules and Hera and looking at King Arthur books and doing all, you know what I mean? So I was fascinated by that hero, you know, that archetype right from the beginning, you know.
You're talking about stories. How important is a story to you within the Star Wars universe? I mean, you've touched on it briefly at the beginning there, but
it's I mean, it is important. I mean, it's got to be, I mean, obviously the best Star Wars stuff that works and what I enjoy is the stuff that's really well written. Like you brought up Rogue One before. And of all the modern stuff, I mean, my two favorite things of the modern stuff is and I'm not counting like the Clone Wars cartoon because that was a little bit pre-Disney and then it was also Disney. That was on the edge, right? But I'm saying like the after Disney bought Star Wars, Rogue One and The Mandalorian are like perfect in my mind. You know what I mean? Those two projects are just absolute perfect Star Wars. And Rogue One is right up there with some of my all-time favorite films, and it's right up there with Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back as some of my favorite Star Wars films and Star Wars stories. And it's stuff that I rewatch all the time. Like I'm not kidding when I tell you that from the moment I got Star Wars on VHS somewhere in the late 90s, I have watched something Star Wars just about every day of my life.
Wow.
And at least every 2 or 3 days, I have something of Star Wars on. And so much so that like when I was young, when I got my car and was driving around, like I had recorded Star Wars on tape and would be playing it in the tape player in my car as I'm driving around. You know what I mean? Because I loved Star Wars that much. I made my own recordings of Star Wars Empire and Jedi that I could play in the car when I was driving to work or doing something and would just listen to it. And I had those 3 movies memorized. And it wasn't until I met this guy, Jeremy, that was the same way. One time we were driving around, like we would just do stuff when I was a kid. Like, what do you want to do tonight? I don't know. Well, let's drive around Canandaigua Lake. Okay. So we would just start and we drive around the whole lake. And we were driving and we saw a sign or something and it reminded me of a line in Star Wars. And I said that line and pointed at the sign, and he said the next line in Star Wars. And then I said the next line, and then he beeped like E2, and then I said something, and then he would do like this grunt like Greedo or something, you know. And it was like we knew even all the aliens lines and all the beeps of R2 and when blaster bolts went up, and we were going back and forth. And by the time we got around Canandaigua Lake, we were on to like Return of the Jedi because we had gone through the rest of Star Wars, all of Empire Strikes Back. And we were now talking, and then it was getting daylight out, and we were like, okay, we're gonna have to get ourselves to work soon, you know. Like we drove all night, like around this lake, you know, just quote Star Wars. And
I mean, you know, you say like you've been a big fan, and you just like discussed your friend there. I mean, how important do you think the older generation of Star Wars fans are to the Star Wars community, or the franchise, should I say?
I mean, the fans that are our age are obviously the ones that that are sort of like, you know, I think the main bread and butter. But I also think that a lot of us, if we have children, we're passing it on to our children in a way that makes the next generation that's behind us almost just as important. But there are situations where you hear like, my kids love the movies, they like The Mandalorian, but they don't really enjoy these other things. Like they didn't enjoy the Acolyte, they didn't enjoy, you know, whatever else, Book of Boba Fett or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that if Disney doesn't, if they don't start just making good Star Wars for the sake of making good stories, just let the story be itself, let it live in the lore, and you know, make good stories. Trust these writers that are in, like, you know, people like Dave Filoni and Joe Favreau and these people that really know how to make films. Like, trust them to do it right. You're going to capture the next generation, and you're going to capture the generation after.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Star Wars, that is important, John. That is important.
Yeah.
It's not all about us older generation fans. Like, I get that. I understand that. We do need to bring in a new generation of fans, but don't do it at the expense of the older generation. I just feel like with the Acolyte and everything that's gone on, it's like we just sweep the older generation to the side. Let's get.
Well, the thing is, the new generation don't like those either. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You know,
the
new generation likes Star Wars Empire and Jedi. They like the prequels. They even, some of them like parts of the sequels, but they don't like the Book of Boba Fett. They don't like the Acolyte. They didn't like all of Obi-Wan. They like some of it, but not all of it. So it's like when you're writing stories that just don't resonate, or whatever, because they're not sticking to the lore, the original idea of Star Wars. Even the younger generation kids pick up on it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I definitely know what you mean. And I feel that because there is so much Star Wars out there now, and there is, it doesn't matter if you don't like everything. You're no less of a fan for not liking something Star Wars than someone who likes that. Do you know
That's
what I
was trying to say at the beginning with James Bond and Star Trek and Batman and other things that have gone on for many, many years. You know, you don't have to like every single movie of James Bond to be a fan of James Bond. So why can't Star Wars be the same way? Just, you know.
Well, I understand it, and they do say that the probably the hardest bunch of people to please are the Star Wars fans.
It's true.
It is. But I think that's because of the bar has been set so high with the original trilogy. And I don't know. I mean, you know, it's been mentioned before in this series that it was lightning in a bottle, and you can't keep trying to capture that magic because it doesn't just happen. You've got to work at it. George Lucas spent years of his life writing that story and getting it to how he wanted it. I mean, even then, when he was filming it, he wasn't happy with how it was because of costs and budget and stuff like that. And, you know, then he went back in 96, 97 or whatever it was and did the re-releases and stuff, you know, the special editions.
Yeah.
You know, he put so much time and effort into that. And I just feel as an older generation fan that he has been kind of disrespected a fair bit of the last. I mean, I know he took a lot of like stick as well for the prequels at the time, but you know, it's
it's unfortunate, but sure.
How important are strong female characters within Star Wars?
I mean, I think they've always been important. I mean, like, Princess Leia was a total badass when she grabbed that gun out of Han's hand or Chewie's hand, and she just started blasting those troopers and kicked them in the butt and said, you know, get in the target, shoot, you fly boy, or whatever she said, you know.
But they've always been there, though, John, haven't they?
Yeah, they've always been there. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know what I mean? I mean, quite frankly, it's like I never really thought as a kid, I never really thought that it mattered. Like, it showed me that everybody in the Star Wars group was a badass in their own way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, Luke had his differences from Han Solo. They weren't similar characters at all, but they both kicked butt when it was needed in a different way. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Han was the rough and tough guy who could get out a blaster and do what he was doing.
Yeah.
And Luke became that Jedi that just had this mystical power. You know what I mean? And even Obi-Wan, like when he first shows up on the scene, he's walking in and it's like he makes this crazy echoing like creature sound out of the Force and scares off all the Tusken Raiders, and he finds Luke and R2 and 3PO there with the speed broken up, and they get on out of there. You know what I mean? Like, to me, that was like, wow, this cool badass wizard just showed up, you know? And so I mean, like when I saw Leia, it was like just another cool person who could kick butt in their group of people that they were putting together for this adventure. I didn't think of it as a difference between men and women. I never did. I just thought these were different.
To be fair, neither did I as a kid. No,
you know what I mean? I just thought these were all just different characters who could each kick butt in their own right, and they brought down the Empire together as a group. You know what I mean?
But I mean, even in the prequels, you had like Amidala. I mean, she was a queen at the age of 14. And then then she was a senator. So
and there was countless female Jedi in the prequels that were just strong, if not stronger than all the the other ones. So
and then recent characters you've had, like Bo-Katan, you've had Fennec Shand, you've had Cara Dune, Jen Erso. So it's not like we haven't had strong female leads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So anyway.
And I mean, outside the trilogy, I always, when people bring up that discussion, I always say, well, did you watch Alien?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, Ripley. Come on.
Yeah, well, I mean, quite.
Who can get more than Ripley? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, she was awesome.
In both movies, she's like, I mean, in the second movie, she's got a freaking flamethrower strapped to a machine gun. And she's out there blasting away hundreds of aliens with machine gun fire.
No one batted an eyelid. No one said anything about it. They just enjoyed it.
They just enjoyed it. Exactly.
It's like that scene at the end of Mandalorian season 2 when you've got Koska Reeves, Bo-Katan, Cara Dune, and Fennec Shand, all four of them together in that group, taking out those dark troopers and stormtroopers and stuff like that. They were it was just incredible, and it was great to watch. No one batted an eyelid. No one cared. It was they were great, and but it wasn't shoved in your face either.
Yeah, that's how it should be written, though. That's what I mean. That's the difference between a good writer and someone who's just doing it to push an agenda. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 2 more questions. How important is it for Star Wars to be inclusive?
Well, I think just about anything should be inclusive. But like I said, you got to be inclusive in a way that comes along with the good writing. You know what I mean? And if you have good writing and the writing is good enough, like I think kind of like what you said, where these roles can be filled by people who would previously have no representation, and it's not, you just go with it. You don't even realize that you're, like you said, you had those 4 women battling at the end of The Mandalorian, and you just didn't even cross your mind that it was, you know what I mean? It just was what it was. That's how it should be. You know what I mean? The writing should be there to make it a good show first and foremost. And the people in it just happen to be of these other groups.
Yeah.
Because really, I mean, we have to be careful when we say this kind of stuff, because a lot of people will look at it and say, like, well, you're in the majority group. Both of you guys are white males. So you know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like, but at the same time, you're just kind of like, you almost, I don't even know how to put it really, but
no one knows that Lando was great. I thought
exactly. You know what I mean?
I mean, even Donald Glover did a great job in Solo. I thought he was superb. Finn, he started off so well, and I know Sai has mentioned it, in his episode, where every poster in the UK, you had a Finn with a lightsaber, and you thought this guy's gonna, But look what they did with his story. Look what they turned him into a bloody janitor.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or someone did the cleaning and stuff like that. The laundry man. That's all he
Yeah.
was. And you just think, really? He had
Yeah.
so much potential. So it's down for these writers. Look, listen, again, I'll hop back to the Acolyte. It had so much potential. It could have been superb. It really could have been. But the writing let it down. And
Yeah.
we're getting blamed because we don't like it, right? They should turn around and have a go at the writers saying, "No, you, that was shit. You made me look a right mug." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I mean, and just one other question as well, just while we're on inclusive. If, for example, there is a gay part and they don't find an actor who is gay that's like a big enough name or isn't experienced enough to play the part, does it matter that you get a straight guy playing a gay part in a movie?
No, it shouldn't, because one of the largest films that was ever done, my father is gay. He came out years ago, okay? And one of his favorite films for representation of the gay community is Brokeback Mountain. And not everybody who portrayed a gay person in Brokeback Mountain is gay in real life. So if the gay community loves a movie that a straight actor portrayed a gay person, why, you know what I mean? Like, why are they having a problem with this now? You know what I mean? Like, that baffles me. And it baffles my dad. He's like, I don't give a crap if a straight person plays a gay person in a movie. Like, why would it matter to me? You know what I mean?
Tom Hanks, he played a gay man in Philadelphia.
Yeah, exactly. That too.
Apparently, it's been reported that he's turned around and said he would feel uncomfortable playing a gay person again in a movie.
Now, yeah.
But why?
Yeah,
I don't get it. Listen, an actor. I mean, you don't go and find the bloody criminals to play a criminal in a movie, do you?
No, yeah, exactly.
It's acting.
You don't go to a maximum security prison and be like, "Hey, look, we need all you rapists to come along because we need you know what I mean?" Like,
it is mad. It's crazy. It's crazy.
And the thing that we don't like, I had this discussion with my dad because he's gay, I often talk to him about his perspective on things, and he had to live through. He's been gay since high school. And he only married my mother because it was the society said it was the right thing to do. Yeah. And he tried to not be gay, and that's how Mark and I were born. But it turned out that he just couldn't live that way, and they ended up getting divorced. We as kids didn't know why they got divorced, but it turns out it's because he's gay and just couldn't deal with it anymore. You know what I mean?
Listen, John, society has changed so much since then. Times have changed. We're living in a completely different world.
But what I mean is that he has that perspective that I like to talk to him about. Like, well, what do you feel on this issue? And one of the things he brought up was he goes, he's actually kind of pissed off that they're trying to get it both ways. He says the thing with the actors, like what you brought up, where they want like the gay community wants. If the role is written for a gay person, they want a gay actor to play that role. They said straight people should not be allowed to play a gay role in a film. But yet the gay people also want to play straight people roles. Yeah. And my dad said that's wrong. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to say that only gay people should play gay roles, then only straight people should play straight roles. But the gay community goes up in arms when you say that. They're like, no, we should have the right to play straight roles. Yeah. Well, then why don't straight people have the right to play gay roles? And that's coming from my dad, who's gay and in the gay community. You know what I mean? He sees the idiocracy of his own demographic. You know what I mean?
There is so much of it, and that is the trouble with today's world that we're living in. It is a crazy mixed up place for sure. Last question for you, John. Overall, what makes Star Wars great?
Well, for me, I think it's, like I said before, it's the sense of adventure. Those first 3 stories were brilliant. The toys came out at the right time. I think I was the perfect age growing up with it. Like I do remember seeing Empire and Jedi in the theaters, especially Return of the Jedi, because by then I was like 10 years old. and I was right in there when Return of the Jedi came out,
Yeah.
and so it's like it's a combination of all that stuff. My best friends in my life were made through Star Wars. When I was a kid, my first best friend was Joey, and he would come over to the house and he would dump out his mason jar like full of figures on the front lawn, and I'd come out with my shoebox full of figures. It was before we got Darth Vader cases, and we'd play Star Wars. And my first bond with another human being, like being my best friend, was over Star Wars toys.
Wow.
And then when we moved to the farm, I felt out of place until I met a new neighbor that moved in like a year or two after we did, named Marty. And I get up to Marty's house, and he's in his front lawn playing with Star Wars figures. And I was just like, hold on, I'll be right back. And I ran home on my bike, got my Star Wars figures, run back up to Marty's. And suddenly Marty and I were best friends. You know what I mean? All through high school and beyond. You know what I mean? And I still talk to him on the phone once in a while, even though we live in different states. I still talk to him on the phone once in a while. And I'm just like, you know what I mean? So like Star Wars has given me lifelong friends, and it's allowed me to make a community like this, like what we have here with this toy community. Yeah. And it continues to bring me friends and people. And I just think that all of that, I mean, the great stories, the incredible toys, and then the people you meet through your love of Star Wars is why I love Star Wars. You know what I mean? Like that's...
Oh, absolutely. It's just echo those thoughts.
Yeah. And most of the time, I have to say, like, you take our community, for example, you take the fan club that I was in Rochester when I lived there. I ended up joining the fan club when I lived in Seattle. So I had the privilege of being in the two longest Star Wars fan clubs that exist in the United States. And like the one in Seattle had members like Gus Lopez and other big names in Star Wars, like Chris B from and is it Jason from Jedi Business and Galaxy of Star Wars Online and all that stuff. Galaxy, it's like they're big. Like the guys who did the very first Star Wars podcast live in Seattle and are in that fan club. You know what I mean? Like, so there's big names in the Star Wars community that I got to know and got to the privilege of going to their houses and seeing their collections and getting to know these people. And it's all through our love of Star Wars. And it just otherwise would not happen without this great franchise and this great group of stories.
It's so interesting to me that I listen to your story, I listen to other people's stories that have been on this series, and think what a great community this Star Wars community is. And that's how people should look at it. They should look at it as being a great community. It doesn't matter if you don't like all of the Star Wars. There's enough to go around. Right, just pick and choose what you like, and have a community that's appreciative of it.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point. I was like through our community here on YouTube, the clubs I've been in through Rochester and Seattle. I can't think of any one of these people, even people, and a lot of those people I still talk to today, or I see when I go to a Star Wars celebration. We all get back together, and I see them there. I see people from Rochester that were in my club. I see people from Seattle that were in the club. And I bump into Gus Lopez again, and we all love Star Wars. None of them are hating on Star Wars. No one in our YouTube community is hating on Star Wars. So it's like these haters seem to be, in my opinion, they almost seem to be outside of the Star Wars community, just hating for hate's sake, trying to get us to view it. Because I don't know, I can't think of a single person that I know out of all these thousands of people that hates something that bad that they're going to sit there online and be bashing it all the time.
I would call them trolls. I mean, I've watched a lot of YouTube channels, and no one's saying they hate it. No one's saying they don't like a certain thing. That's fine. We've mentioned that. But it's I'll just say they're trolls. They're trolls. You get trolls everywhere and stuff like that. I mean, how can you hate Star Wars? I mean, I don't hate the Acolyte. I'm disappointed in it because it didn't.
That's what it is. I get disappointed in this stuff.
And you're allowed to be disappointed. Anyhow, John, I've got to say that has come to the end of the chat, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the channel and talking Star Wars with you. It really has, and it's you know, I love chatting to you. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking part, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love I just love Star Wars, and you know what I mean. And like I said, I mean, I'm a little like put off by how this conversation started. I hope it's okay, but it's like I don't even enjoy talking about that side of it as much as we went into today. But
yeah,
you know, it is what it is.
You know, again, it's I want to hear people's thoughts about it. You know, is it just, you know, yes, no? It's as simple as that. It's about opinions, and it's about respect for those people's opinions and stuff like that. So it's you know, it doesn't make us right or wrong. It's just an opinion. And
I guess that's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And but the rest of the I love the whole of the conversation, by the way. But yeah, it's just an absolute pleasure, man. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who stayed to the end to watch or listen. It is very much appreciated. Take care, stay safe, and we shall see you in the next video. Bye for now.